Om Shanti, everybody. Hello. And if this is your first time joining us, then I just want to share that Om Shanti means I am peace. So we often greet each other, the Brahma Kumaris. My name is Meredith, by the way, and I'm really delighted that you're here with us today. I always, whenever we do a program, I think, well, people are so busy, even though they think they're not busy. Joining Zoom classes, there's just always something people seem to be doing these days. And what I feel is if you're here, then you've taken the time to be here for something that I feel is all about giving something to you in terms of maybe making a change in your life, a small change, maybe becoming enlightened. We have some very enlightened guests that I'm going to get the pleasure of interviewing today. So I'm thrilled. And I wanted to just tell you that I looked up the word when I thought about what theme we could have. And I looked up the word well-being, and it was everything from happiness to feeling good, to being healthy, to being peaceful. I mean, it was like a mix of every word, every theme that I think we touch on all the time. And I thought how interesting that in one word, well-being, it says it all, everything that I feel that we need to be able to move forward at this time or at any time in our lives, and not to get stuck, not to get stuck in our lives with all the anxiety around and the uncertainty of the future. And so I think it's an important topic. And I know that our guests have also explored this through their work and through their lives. And our first guest, who you're going to meet in a few minutes, is Dan Atchison-Nevel, who is going to explore this topic with us. And he's a very well-known, extremely well-known acupuncturist. He's been doing it for so many years, dedicated his life to it. And it goes back to a really early times in his life. We're going to be hearing about that, some of his very interesting stories. And I think we're also going to be getting to hear some of his healing poetry today. Dan, you mentioned Dan's name, and people just know who he is. People that are in the know when it comes to healing, natural healing, anything to do with acupuncture. And there's reason for it. And I think it has to do, Dan, with your commitment to it over so many years, and your willingness even to change and create a lot of change, even when it comes to your profession, which we're going to be hearing about today, and how you see well-being. But before I ask you your first question, I just want to read something that I read that you wrote. And it has to do with, it was on your blog, so you said I could take anything from that you've written or said. He said that this is coming from Dan Atchison-Nevel. My first meditation practice was sitting in the bushes under the full moon, singing love songs that I had written to that I wrote to the hibiscus, to my hibiscus flowers. And so I think that's it. It was just he was very young. I think that he was maybe, Dan, you can confirm this, right? How old were you when you wrote this? You were sitting under these bushes like a yogi, right? Sitting under a tree.
Or a strange, curious little boy, yes.
Well, Dan, most boys weren't doing that at that time.
No, that's true. That's the strange, curious part. I'm guessing around 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. We had just moved to Miami Beach from Coral Gables, and I was attracted to hibiscus.
Hibiscus, yeah. Well, I grew up on Miami Beach too, so I know the beauty of hibiscus. They just bring a lot of joy, just seeing them. And then I just want to share a little bit about your background. Then you went on to, you were always interested in spirituality again. Was it as a teenager? You were studying and reading and trying to practice somewhat. So what was going on with you then? Again, quite young.
I grew up in it. I grew up with a father who was a businessman, but also did laying on the hands. So when we were ill or upset, we would get laying on the hands. My mother was very counterculture. She never drove a car. So I grew up driving around in the back of a bicycle with her, and she did yoga in the 50s. So while they were both living conventional lives at the same time, they were both interested in these things. I had an aunt who lived in an ashram and cousins who meditated. We were still a little bit of the outlier. So I grew up in it, and I grew up on natural foods. So I was very blessed in that way, that my sitting in the bushes and singing to the flowers was indulged, let's say, or even maybe appreciated to a certain extent. So that was, very lucky.
Very lucky. So you weren't alone, I think is really what you're saying, which is very important, because a lot of people do feel alone when they start to embark on, especially years ago, on a path that is not conventional and maybe isn't according to the world, what the family is doing. And so it's,
that's the truth. Many people who are, let's say, we'll call them cultural creatives, or, have a slightly different sort of view of the world, especially as young children, they have it shut down. And for many of those who have it shut down, or actually to a great degree, I believe all children are born sort of in these states, to one degree or another. And to the extent that it's allowed to blossom and allowed to flourish, and the natural curiosity about things and the way the imagination plays out and flows is allowed to manifest, the healthier and the more expansive they can grow as an adult. When these things are shut down, when the natural sort of curiosity and reaching out into the world of a child is shut down, that shows up later in life, with this as contraction or habituated tension in the body, which can end up being all kinds of different chronic diseases or emotional types of diseases. It can show up as, low-grade depressions or extreme depressions, or as sort of diffuse anxieties, or someone said earlier that for them, wellness or well-being is contentment, and it shows up as a lack of contentment, right? Just no matter what it is, a lack of satisfaction, a lack of contentment. So a lot of the work that we do, and a lot of, I'm sure, what the Brahma Kumaris are doing, and a lot of the other wisdom traditions and spiritual traditions is doing, is really just returning people, right? Helping them dissolve and unwind and return to what is really our most natural state, the state that we're born into. And so when you said a little earlier, you said, we're all trying to get to this state, and wouldn't it be nice if we can hold this state? For me, a lot of it's about the returning, right? And cultivating and learning and really processing how to return to that state. Because I don't know, I'm sure there are a few really enlightened people walking around who live in that state at all times. But for me, the magic, the beauty, the grace, the ease is in cultivating the capacity that when we're far from that state, when we're feeling very emotional or very distressed in whatever way, or very, let's say, at odds with our own bodies in pain or distress, that we can cultivate the capacity to return to that state of ease, right? And acceptance. And so it's the returning that has a lot to do with it.
I love that word, returning.
Yeah.
I was thinking of a word not as good as your word, but undoing. It's almost as if you have to undo something that was part of you for so long. If you did grow up in and I don't want to just blame people's families, but people that weren't aware. Many families weren't aware. They had their own struggles. They had their own difficulty. I was just reading a story about a child, and apparently there's many stories like this, that will not leave the house now because the child loved to play outside and loved to run around. And because of the virus, the parents had said so many things to the child. You can't go outside. You can't touch the jungle, the gym, the outside jungle gyms. You can't do this. You can't do that. Wear the mask. The child got to a point where he just didn't want to leave the house. And this was written up, I think it was even the New York Times, that it's not uncommon now because they've been hearing the fears of their parents and it affects them.
This is maybe playing out now, but this is a process that plays out and has played out in all modern cultures, right? This unlearning is a beautiful word, by the way, unlearning, or we also use the term dissolving, right? Unlearning happens more, let's say, in the mind. Dissolving happens in the body. But as children, there's a great emphasis on learning, right? Not maintaining this natural state that we already have, but learning, learning, learning. And then what you find that as an adult, when you're starting to try to cultivate a more easeful existence. And for me, cultivating an easeful existence means that from getting from point A to point B, it's very simple for me. To get from point A to point B, I want to do it with as much internal ease as possible and as much external grace as possible, meaning getting from point A to B in time or space with as much ease internally and externally doing the least amount of damage and sharing the most amount of love possible. And so this is for me really what well-being is about. And as a really a student and a practitioner of acupuncture, which unwound for me into all the ancient wisdom traditions, and remembering that evolutionarily speaking, we're not just the biological descendants of our parents, but we're the evolutionary descendants of every human being and every sentient being that ever lived on the planet. So we have all their wisdom within us. All of that's there that we can tap into. And when we remember that well-being is a verb, that's really the thing. When we sort of verb it, right?
Yeah.
And human being is a verb. The Taoists took this and sort of made it the premise as that the only constant is change, right? But that we're constantly in change. Things are constantly changing. And so therefore, for me, the concept of well-being is being in a way that creates ease and creates grace, does the minimum amount of damage to the world in which we're embedded in and grown from, and can tap into both our really inherited evolutionary inheritance, remembering at the same time that we are the evolutionary inheritance of our descendants. And so when we embed ourselves in our awareness in this way, with every word we say, with the actions that we take, that we keep this awareness in mind, then we can live in a more easeful, more graceful way, remembering always that when we go far off that track, we always have the returning. It's all about the returning. And so no matter how long you've been off the track, and to get into well-being or with any illness you might have, this returning is always possible. The elimination of the disease process may not always be possible, but this returning to a state of internal ease is. And this is something that I learned early on from my patients when I first went into practice in 1982 in South Beach. And I know you remember at the time, South Beach at that time was really had a lot of Eastern European Holocaust survivors there. And I was in my 20s at the time, and I was amazed to meet these people, the wisdom that they held. We all think we're going through something now, right, with the pandemic. But these people had lost family members, lost loved ones, had survived the Holocaust. And you combine this also with, you had the Hispanic community, right, that had come over from Cuba, that was at that time, who had lost and left everything behind. And there's all these people that they would wake up on South Beach, right? And they'd go, and I don't know if you remember, they'd sit on their chairs and they'd have their Yiddish newspapers or their Spanish language papers. And they'd sit there really simple, a little borscht, a little sunshine sitting under a tree, a little conversation. And they had somehow returned with all that trauma to a state of ease. And I had the amazing gift early in my career as a wild-eyed, idealist, passionate 20-something who was like going to help change the world. And I thought, I'm going to help all these people. And I'm finding out there's just tremendous wisdom. And I learned the art and the power of listening, because these people, they would tell stories and you would watch them come alive. as they told the stories, right? Because they were sharing the wisdoms. And I could feel myself coming alive, being in their presence. So because they were a lot of my first patients, and I had the blessing of them as my first patient, that I had these really, you know, we say we meet old souls. They were actually old people who were wizened souls, who had this wisdom. It touched me in a way that all these years later, you know, like with the greatest of all our blessings, I can return to that moment and that presence and the gift and the grace that was. So for me, that's a large part of the well-being. They didn't use the words that we use today. I never heard of one of them say, "I'm going to be present in the moment." Right? But they would describe that process. You know, when I would say, how is it that you survive this? How do you get up in the morning and live your day? And they say, look at the beauty, right? Look at the palm tree. One guy, I'll never forget it. He said, Danny, they loved Danny in those days. Danny, you just got to go out there, get under that palm tree and feel that breeze, kiss your cheek. And then you know all will be well. Well, that's mindfulness at its, you know, at its highest. That's a meditation practice. So that was a very beautiful experience that I got to have very, very early in my career. That's, you know, I've carried with me forward throughout the rest of my practice.
It's a very powerful experience. And again, having grown up and actually been on Miami Beach or done a lot of things on Miami Beach through my work, I remember those people too, not to the extent that you do, but I remember we would go do interviews when we needed to get seniors' reactions to an issue. We would head for South Beach, right? And they were all on the beach. Yeah. And I don't have any details like you do, but all I do remember is they were having a good time. They were in pleasure. They were together, enjoying themselves. And I thank you for sharing that, because often people think, oh, they suffered so much, and they did, but they rebounded, didn't they? So would you say that was resilience? Is that part of what we're going through now? I've never
tried to label it in any way. Yeah. To a certain extent, they survived it given with the tools that they had. But the one unifying factor I would see with all of them, and you know, some were more psychologically aware. I'm sure others had repressed quite a bit, and you know, what we call avoidance today. They had come to this moment in a lot of different ways. But what they had in common is that they could become very grateful, present into the moment that they had at any moment. And that is, you know, listen, some of them were miserable. I'm not talking, you know, like all human beings. Some of them were just walking around and hadn't gotten over it. But I'm talking about a large percentage of them who were able to sit there in a chair on the beach and really just be present and enjoy their day. It was a very powerful thing. Lots of them had what I call the default smile. You know, they default into a smile. A lot of them had horror frozen on their face. I don't want to make it all, you know.
Right, that all was bliss, right.
Flowers and happy times. That's certainly not what it was. But there were moments of deep satisfaction and contentment. I think for lots of them, just the fact that they were able to survive and have families and know that for them the future was going on. But they were teachers of mine, and you know, they taught me how to listen. They taught me that that this concept that it's very easy to inflate as a healthcare provider, sometimes to get very much into what we'll call this very vertical relationship, where you know you feel like you're the expert and they're coming to you to be healed. And it immediately, right at the start of my career, just turned it into this very horizontal type of thing. I now view it more of like a mandala. Like sometimes, you know, it's very even playing field, and sometimes they're far more expert and they're way above me on whatever they may be talking about. I always also try to keep in mind that every patient or every person I ever work with, they are the world's leading expert on themselves. And that's a really important sort of idea or concept or reality to keep in mind at all times. We are all the world's leading experts on ourselves. And the more that we realize that, and the more we can tap into that expertise internally, and share with healthcare providers and healers and others that we're looking to assistance. But we share from the space of knowing we are the world's leading experts on ourselves. And that what we're looking for when we go to any healthcare provider, be it an acupuncturist or a body worker or a medical doctor or a surgeon or an oncologist or an astrologer, all these, or a shaman, any of these we can put into that whole healing, matrix or community. We're going to them for whatever expertise they may have to share with us. But we're going as the world's leading experts on ourselves. And if we keep that in mind, we'll choose practitioners to work with that respect that. And if you're working with a practitioner, again, I went in with the imagination going on is that acupuncturists were all going to be sort of one way and medical doctors were going to be sort of another. And I had that kicked out of me right from the beginning. There are really beautiful medical doctors that I've worked with over the years that deeply cherish the work that they do and work with people knowing that they are the world's leading experts on themselves. And then there are acupuncturists who are very inflated and it's easy. Listen, anyone who teaches yoga or is an acupuncturist or anywhere where all of a sudden you're speaking and people are listening to you and taking to you what you say very seriously, it's very easy to get inflated in that, right? It's easy to forget that, like at a gathering like this, there's however, 30 something people that are gathering here. Each person's not only the world's leading expert on themselves, but they have deep areas of expertise and sharing that they could be up here sharing right now. Mm-hmm. And that it just so happens I'm talking now and you're listening. You follow what I'm saying, or you're talking?
Yeah. Well, I think what you're saying, one thing that I'm taking from you, Dan, is trusting yourself and listening to yourself. A lot of people, they do it, they might hear themselves, but they kind of squash it, right? And I know someone who, recently took very ill at pretty young, not so young, and is not yet ready to she's depending upon others to help her.
Well, that's beautiful too. There are times, I don't want to give the wrong impression. There are times completely to turn oneself over to another's expertise. Mm-hmm. Trust comes from my standpoint, where trusting yourself comes from spending time cultivating your relationship with yourself. And in our model, the wisdom tradition from which acupuncture grew and that I believe a lot of other healing traditions grew, we see this, basically we have this very simple model where we see the universe birthing herself through us, right? And we have these three wombs that shows up later in acupuncture and Tai Chi Qigong as the Dandian or the three Dandian, but the upper womb, the womb of the chest, and the womb of the pelvis or the belly. And in our upper womb, we have our thinking, right? We have our imagination, and we have our cognition, and we have our senses, our touch, our taste, our smell, all of that. In the middle womb, we have our entire embodied emotional world, our angers, our griefs, our fears, our worries, our joys. And in the lower womb, we have our breath and our connection to breath and spirit, sort of our whole sort of spiritual life. The pelvis, the belly is where the women, the women of our species literally give birth from. Yeah. But we see all things sort of birthing, or the connection for all of us at one point was through the umbilical cord to our own personal divine mother as we basked in the womb. And all of that sensation, our time in the womb is still there at our depths, right? So when we talk about trusting ourselves, it's something that we can actually cultivate. How do we do that? We spend time looking at our thinking, not with judgment, but with curiosity, right? Just like one might look at a waterfall and say, magnificent. We can look at our own mind and our own thinking. And I spend time, like we all do, with our minds and our thinking all the time. And the idea is that we can look at our thinking with curiosity, like, oh my God, look at me. I'm really got wild thoughts going on today. Or, hey, I'm having sort of peaceful thoughts going on today. Still cultivating that relationship with tenderness, like you would tend to a garden. Beautiful. Right? And you spend some time cultivating and paying attention and hanging out with your thinking, with tenderness and care, hanging out with your senses, hanging out with your embodied emotional experiences, and hanging out with your breath and spirit. And, you know, moving through the world and receiving the world as it moves through you, while cultivating all these things, allows us to eventually have some sort of trust, right? I work on the assumption, and this is a really easy assumption for me to work from. If I recommend for someone to do something and they don't do it, I recommended something that they weren't ready or capable of doing at that moment in time. See, a lot of practice will get around and they don't want to get well or this or that, but everybody has just an amazing life story. Most of our distortions, most of our distorted patterns that we live with, that we judge ourselves for, were very important survival mechanisms for us at one point in our time. It's a really important point. I want to repeat it. Most of what we'll judge ourselves for were life-saving survival mechanisms for ourselves at one time. So, for example, if we hypercontract or we're oversensitive to what other people are saying, some point that contraction and that sensitivity developed within us as a protective mechanism for whatever situation we might have found ourselves in at that time, right? Lots of children find themselves in very traumatic situations. Even children who are in families where the families are okay, they might find themselves in a school system that's, you know, let's say for people who are square and triangles, and it turns out they're round, so they never fit. So there's a lot of this struggle and this trauma, and they develop mechanisms that are survival mechanisms. They're like old friends. They may not be old friends that we need anymore or at this moment in time, but if we as we become aware of them, instead of judging them, we treat them like old friends and say, hey, old friend of avoidance, I don't really need you in the same way at this time, but I'm going to keep you around because there's going to be times I really want to avoid something, right? You know, so this is sort of the relationship, having the same relationship with ourselves that we might have with the world at large. So this is one of the beautiful metaphors of Chinese medicine, that we're taking care of ourselves like we would take care of a garden. Exactly the same way. And I might add that it's a natural garden, not one with artificial, fertilizers and poisons and toxins, but that the way that they were gardening, this metaphor evolved before all that existed, when one had to be sort of one with it and aware with this and understanding the verbing of a garden, right? Of well-being, right? As a verb, that our well-being is a verb. And however it is we're feeling now, we could love it now or we could hate it now, but it's just now, and that it's going to change whether we're, reaching out to cling to it or whether we're averse to it. It's not going to stay the same that it is at this moment in time.
As you said, everything changes. So even we're looking at the world today and people, there's people that are able to move forward gently, as you're saying, and make changes in their lives and open themselves up to what's going on inside. And there's others who just can't, they're still angry. Someone wrote me and said that they were so anxious and tired all the time, and because of they just can't face what's going on. And so I think maybe it's just a matter of time. At that right moment, as you said, you can't rush it, that person would maybe wake up and just realize it's time to be more open or make a change. So speaking of change, Dan, I wanted to just briefly talk a little bit about what you have been up to for the last, well, I should say many years, where you began to change the way you worked and you developed this amazing program, NSEV, right? Is that right? NSEV? Did I say it? And before that, if you could just say a few things about it, and then we'll go to the video.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Is that okay? Yeah. And then we'll come back. Right.
We practice acupuncture, but more than that, acupuncture grew out of a worldview and a way of navigating the universe that predates acupuncture by thousands of years. So acupuncture is simply putting needles, or moxibustion, which are herbs, or massaging or using magnets or whatever way of stimulating these entryways or these points into these pathways and flows through the body to try to break old habituated patterns and encourage the body to go in the direction that it's supposed to be, that it's most productively would be going. So that's acupuncture. But where did acupuncture come from? Well, it came from a very particular worldview that predates even China, as a wisdom tradition, this worldview that human beings are embedded in the whole, meaning we're simultaneously the small speck embedded in the whole. The universe gives birth to us, and then we contain the whole within us. And these are very simple, but very, very profound statements. So that with any breath or any little walk across the way, you can look and you can understand certain things about the person's whole story unfolding about them. And that we do things in habituated patterns. And some of these habituated patterns are very productive for us, and some of them are very unproductive for us. So that within acupuncture, using these techniques, what we're doing is we're trying to dissolve or unlearn the non-productive or counterproductive habituated patterns that lead to disease and distress in the body. And we're trying to encourage the ones that are more helpful and healthful for us. If you go back from that, well, then you can look at this from any numbers of ways. You can look at this, well, how does one eat? How does one breathe? How does one live their life? How does one navigate each day? And as you wind this, you find out that Chinese medicine doesn't have, a total lock on all this thing, that all of the world's wisdom traditions have something to say. So we expanded our sort of viewpoint into all the world's wisdom traditions. We still sort of bring it through the mindset and the sort of the model we have of yin yang and 5 phases of Chinese medicine, but we're looking at all the world's wisdom traditions and seeing how they can integrate, whether it's a breathing traditions, whether it's a mind tradition, whether it's an exercise tradition, healing traditions. And so we've started to embrace that. As a community, we've expanded out. So the people that we study with and together, we're now global. Since the pandemic, we're really all over the world because we're doing a lot online now. And we have all kinds of healers. And I define healer as any person trying to help another human being, right? So we're all healers. So we have everything from acupuncturists to medical doctors to chiropractors to osteopaths to yogis to mindfulness practitioners to body workers, physical therapists, nurses, psychologists. We're all studying together, and we have a little bit of agreed upon language, right? So that we can have this meeting place for our dialogue. But we're exploring all these things from this one centralized place. That's what we're doing.
Wow, that is powerful. And what I'm just feeling is if everybody in the world, again, as I was saying earlier, were able to do this and it be all inclusive, if this became the norm, this is how the world again would change. And that's what you're doing and you've been doing. So why don't we take a look at what you're doing and see it visually, because it's quite awesome to see what you do and hear what you have to say on your film.
All right.
From the very, very first time that I started to study acupuncture, I had this attraction to the extraordinary vessels. There was almost no information in writing at the time. So every practitioner of acupuncture I ever met, I always inquired and dialogued with them about what they knew of the extraordinary vessels. During this time, I ran into a practitioner who came from a long family lineage, which used the extraordinary vessels almost exclusively in their practice. From him, I had my breakthrough moment. I learned the rudiments of what became the NSCV healing, and he shared with me what became a basic tenet of NSCV healing, which is that we must explore the extraordinary vessels to truly know them through their direct experience. It's not something that could come from outside yourself. And so beginning then, I began the practice of doing a master couple point treatment every day. And to this point, I've done over 8,000 direct extraordinary vessel treatments on myself, and I've treated between 75 and 80,000 patients using the extraordinary vessel model. Another major area of explorations within the NSCV healing movement has been the shared group acupuncture experience. What grew out of an exercise for my acupuncture students has grown into a movement of its own. These shared group acupuncture experiences, where a group of people receive the same extraordinary vessel acupuncture treatment at the same time. We've coupled these shared group acupuncture experiences with live music, meditations, and many other wonderful things. This year we had 165 people receive acupuncture from 15 different acupuncturists in the grand ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel in Miami. These types of experiences, where we're exploring the collective aspect of the acupuncture experiences as well as the individual aspects, is very exciting and holds great potential for the future for treating large groups of people with shared goals or conditions.
Amazing. And that is just a bit of the video.
Yeah.
I just wanted people to see it, to talk about it. As you know, I heard about what you were doing a long time ago. I even think it's when I was working at WLRN from your friend, our mutual friend, Michael Stock, about these.
Yeah, well, Michael was actually involved in that one event at the Biltmore.
Was he? I didn't know that.
He organized a couple of concerts and a yoga concert where people were doing yoga with the music. It was a fun event. Yeah.
So it was hard for me to comprehend a whole group of people getting acupuncture at the time, and then I've been hearing more.
Yeah,
so
well, this is the beauty of the imagination and the gift of community. Was we were just doing it as a learning experience, and someone said we should really do a large group, and I said, okay, let's do it. And next thing you know, they give us the whole area of the Biltmore, and it was really a fantastically fun. Yoga had been doing this kind of thing for millennia, right? Where you have both this idea of a private practice and a group practice, and there's a power to sort of these group practices. So as individual human beings, our well-being can't be just an individual process. I guess I would like to leave there, it's like saying we need to cultivate our individual well-being, but we also need to be cultivating not our thinking and our imagination and our cognition and our senses and our emotional world and our breath and spirit. Internally, we have to do it with our families and our friends and our communities and with our country and with our whole human family and with our whole, what I call the evolutionary family, all the sentient beings, right down to the trees and the mountains and all of the wisdom teachers. In Taoism and a lot of the early wisdom traditions, the teachers of stillness were the mountains and trees, right? You want to learn how to be solid and sit and still. You want to learn how to root. Make friends with a mountain, or in Miami, we make friends with trees, right? We don't have a lot of mountains to make friends with here. So the idea of really and this is not like just an idea. This is something you actually do. Make friends with the tree. Find a wise old tree that's in your neighborhood. We were talking right at the beginning, you were talking about the tree outside the Giller building, who you had a relationship, it turns out, with as a child, and so did I. It was an important tree. We hung out under that tree to catch the bus to go out into the world. This is how it worked then. But also, as we hung out under that tree, just hanging out with it, we got the wisdom of the tree, right? It was old, wise. It's still going there 50 years later,
Still there. It's amazing.
Still hanging out. And it survived. It survived the development. It survived the cement. It survived it all. And these are what's amazing about trees, right? And that they simultaneously are sending their roots down into the earth, right? And the thing about a tree, if tree has a gigantic canopy, the root system is broader than the canopy. It's an amazing. So if you're anywhere under the canopy of a wise old tree, your bottoms of your feet are able to draw up the energy from the roots of that tree. Okay, so trees are great, teachers. And then part of our well-being is to really understand that and to take it both internally and externally to our families, communities, the world, and the whole planet, both through time and space, both understanding that our very presence here was some sort of miraculous gift from our ancestors, right? And that we have all the wisdom within us, and our every action, we are our descendants' ancestors. So we should keep that in mind too, as we navigate our well-being.
Dan, I have personally learned a lot from you. Now I understand when I told you how much time you were going to have, you said, that's all? I need more time. Well, I think you should have told me you needed hours. We would have had to plan a whole day with you, which you do with your workshops. You have ongoing online workshops, so people could really get in touch with what you're doing by your website, right? The NSEV website, or just
NSEV, NSEVhealing.com.
Yeah, healing.com. NSEV healing.com.
Yeah.
Is that good? Because I personally learned a lot about you and your work, and your dedication is, to me, what it's all about, that you just keep growing and keep evolving. And that's what we all need to be doing now if we want to just move forward with happiness and well-being, or just total well-being.
Keep cultivating the well-being everywhere we
Yes.
But by request, Donna asked if I would share a poem. So
yes, I know you had a poem ready, right?
There's a poem actually I posted today. It's called "A Poem to Everyone I Meet." So I'd like to say to all of you who I'm meeting today, I place my heart at your feet, for you two are my beloved. Our meeting is not an accident. My soul and your soul are old friends. Your presence here is a beautiful gift. Together we are birthing the universe. Soon enough we'll be dead 1,008 years. But this moment, your breath, you breathe and I am born again. How precious, how holy is our time together. I see the Divine Mother looking out of your eyes. Your lips move and I hear the Sacred One speaking. How miraculous, how fated, our meeting here on earth. Human flesh and bones alive, walking, talking, sharing life. So I'm very grateful for you having me here today. I appreciate it.
Dan, I think we need to add a title to your resume. Your already impressive resume, poet, great poet. I hope I could see some more of your poetry in the future and learn more from you in so many ways. I've learned a lot from just listening to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.